Welcome everybody to our first webinar of 2019. It is cold here in Virginia. I no doubt think it's cold wherever you are as well. So we're in the thick of winter. Let's talk about winter feeding and also the Breeders' Excel, because we've made a couple of changes there based on customer feedback. So we'll go ahead and get started. Today, we're going to talk about digestive function, and for those of you that have seen my presentations, you know I always start with basic digestive function. It's really important that we have a good grasp on this as horse owners, as dealers. Talk about some energy requirements for horses in wintertime. Does it change based on how cold it is outside? Fiber requirements, because really that's how you're going to keep your horse warm, is through the fiber that you're feeding them. Water requirements. A lot of us forget that the horse still needs to drink plenty of water in the wintertime, and then touch on that Breeders' Excel and the changes that we've made. Of course, at the end, feel free to ask questions on anything that you want to ask questions on. So, on the left-hand side, this is what is normal for horses. They stand out in a field, they eat off the ground. Right now, that ground is covered in white snow in a lot of areas, or that grass is dormant. So they're not really getting any nutritional value out of it, but they're still getting socialization. But normally, they would be grazing for 12 to 18 hours out of the day. They move while they eat, and they live in herds. They are social animals. They also eat off the ground. That is the normal head position for horses, that they eat off the ground. So it's really important that when we put horses in stalls, and especially over the wintertime, a lot more of our horses that may not have been stalled during the summer and winter, they are being stalled, or they're in small run-ins, because we don't want to ruin the fields or create mud paddocks for whatever reason, or it's really cold and we're keeping them in to try and keep them a little warmer. Then it's really, really important that we realize what they're designed to do and that we try and mimic that in the stall. So first thing to do is put the hay on the ground. Slow feeders are great because it mimics grazing time, but as lower to the ground as you can get the feed and the hay, that is better for natural behavior. Our modern horse diet, we, as you can see in this picture, put feed buckets hanging at about chest height, which is unnatural for the horse, and we feed them a lot of grain, which can change the overall acidity of the GI tract. Also, as we mentioned, horses are social animals. They like to be in a herd. So if they are being stalled, is there a way that you can make your barn a little more open? You can see this stall has the bars at the top so that the horse could see out and they could see between the stalls as well. Like, they really like to be social. So let's talk about winter and what happens in the wintertime. Well, horses decrease their feed intake in cold and windy weather, and they seek shelter. Quite the opposite. I'm cold and I just want to eat because I'm so cold. But horses will decrease their feed intake, and that really is a survival mechanism, because in the wild there would have been a lot of snow on the ground, so it was harder for them to eat, and they would just conserve energy by seeking shelter and standing out of the cold. With snow accumulation greater than 7 inches, that really covers the grass, and it decreases intake of the pasture. Decreases grazing time by about 24% and overall intake by about 22%, because they're having to pour through that snow to get to the grass. And as we've mentioned, that grass is really low in nutritional value at this point, because just roughage, it's just fiber to feed the bacteria. But when they're pouring, that's also increasing their energy requirement. So you think about, we have a horse that is at maintenance, needs X amount of energy and protein and nutrients just to stay at maintenance. And then we put on top of that it's really cold, and so he needs more energy to stay warm because he's shivering to stay warm. So we need to support that extra exercise that he's doing by shivering. Plus, if he's pouring through deep snow to get to pasture to chew on, then that's using energy as well. In cold and windy conditions, horses lose more body weight because they're losing heat, and they're burning energy to stay warm. So we need to account for that, but it really depends on how cold it is, and also, is it raining or is it windy? But before we get into that, I think we just, again, an overview of what is an absolute bare minimum amount of fiber for a horse. And this doesn't matter whether it's summer or winter. Obviously, in the summer, if you have access to pasture, then a lot of this fiber requirement is going to be coming from the pasture. But if your horses are stalled, or if we're here into the winter time, then we need to make sure that we're providing them all of the forage that they require. So absolute bare minimum is 1% of body weight. So for a 1,000-pound horse, that's 10 pounds of forage. If we want horses to lose weight, I feed them about 1.2% of body weight. Now, I would feed 1.2% of their current body weight, their overweight body weight, which that'll work out to be about a 1.5% of their ideal body weight. So I typically recommend most horses be fed between 1.5% and 2.5% of body weight. That's going to be anywhere between 15 and 20 pounds of fiber per day. And as mentioned before, it's not just about feeding them enough fiber, it's also about mimicking that grazing behavior, about spreading it out. Otherwise, we increase our risk for other issues like gastric and colonic ulcers. And what you will notice in areas where you do get a lot of snow covering the ground, end of February, beginning of March, we start to find horses chewing wood, maybe getting a little bit more loose manure diarrhea. And those are all classic signs that we see in horses that are, having to be stabled over the winter time, and they're just craving some of that non-digestible fiber. When we're evaluating temperature, we really look at this thing called LCT, or lower critical temperature. It's the temperature below which the metabolic heat production must be increased to maintain body temperature. So right now, not right now, but let's just say in normal conditions, it's summer, spring, fall, it's just normal conditions, they're not having to expend any extra energy to maintain body temperature. They are at neutral metabolic heat. But in the wintertime, we need to use a lot more energy to maintain body temperature. So what is the lower critical temperature? For mature horses, we got to take into account a few other factors, like do they have a thin coat or a thick coat? If they've got a thin coat, then the lower critical temperature, so the temperature at which we need to start feeding them more to maintain their body temperature and body weight, is 41 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you've got a horse with a thin coat, if it gets below 41 degrees Fahrenheit, we're going to have to start bumping up the amount of feed we're giving them. These could also be guides for when you might start blanketing your horses. Thick coat, horses with a really thick coat, a lot of your ponies, horses you're not clipping, around 5 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's when we're really going to have to start bumping up the amount of hay and energy in the diet for them to maintain body temperature. That's for adult horses, though. Now, think about senior horses, anything 20 and above. Use the 41 degrees for those horses, because most of those horses don't have a lot of extra fat covering. So I think I use the 41, the upper level there, for senior horses. Young horses, young growing horses, their range is between 12 and 32 degrees, so not quite as wide a range. Again, for each decrease in coldness of 1 degree Fahrenheit below that critical temperature, there is an increase in digestible energy requirements just to keep the horse's body temperature maintained. Estimated feed energy increase at different magnitudes of cold below that critical temperature. So if we're talking about the adult horse with a thin coat, so 41 degrees is his temperature. Let's say it's 42 degrees. So we don't need to feed any extra energy other than what is his maintenance, or any extra feed. But let's say that we get down to 31 degrees. So we're 10 degrees below that lower critical temperature, that 41 degrees. His energy requirements increased by about 2 megacalories per day. And his average feed intake, this is assuming a pretty good quality hay, and we'll say that that good quality hay has about 1 megacal per pound. So that's going to increase his hay intake by about 2 pounds a day. If we get down, so if we're now below freezing, so we're at 21 degrees. So we're now 20 degrees below that lower critical temperature for that adult horse with the thin coat, then we've increased to about needing an extra 4 pounds of hay per day. And you can see as we get really cold, we're really increasing the amount of energy that we need. Excuse me. Assuming that that horse is eating, that 1,000-pound horse is eating at least 1.5% of its body weight in hay to maintain body condition, you're going to get to a point where we may not be able to feed enough hay in order to get that extra calories for body maintenance. So if the average temperature is 32 degrees, plus we've got 10 to 15 miles per hour winds, we're increasing not just by 1 or 2 megacalories of energy, but we're now looking at 4 to 8 additional pounds of hay per day. So wind, you know, when you're out in the wind, it really takes it out of you. So if it's freezing, so 32 degrees plus rain, we're looking at about 6 additional pounds of hay a day. And if it's 32 degrees, if it's freezing and it's raining and it's windy, well, then we're having to feed about 10 to 15 additional pounds per day. And this is where we get to a point, if we were already feeding 15 to 20 pounds of hay to the horse originally, now we're adding another 10 to 15 pounds. So we're looking at 30 pounds of hay. That just may not be feasible. Horses just may not be able to eat that much. It may not be the best quality hay. So even if you're feeding 30 pounds a day, if it's not that 1 megacal per pound hay, so good quality hay, that's when bringing in higher nutrient densities, adding some oats, adding some grain, adding some concentrate, adding some extra beet pulp, adding some more energy dense ingredients may be required. I've mentioned all along that it's really important that we try to mimic grazing behavior. So we've calculated that we need additional hay on top of what we're already feeding. So how do I make sure that throughout the day they're continually consuming that hay, continually feeding that bacteria? Because the other thing about what's going on in the hindgut is when those bacteria that live in the hindgut are breaking down that fiber, they're actually, a byproduct they're creating is heat. So we want that continual heat production to keep them warm. So we want to be mimicking grazing behavior for stomach health, for hindgut health, but also continual heat production. So using your slow feeder hay nets, using some kind of slow feeder contraption that you can put in the corner of the stall and keep low to the ground. These are all ideal ways to extend meal time. If you do have a slow feeder already, but you think, oh gosh, I have a slow feeder or a slow hay net and my horse is still eating through the hay really fast, then you can add a grazing muzzle as well. You can add a grazing muzzle in the stall so that you can further slow down. Now, I have been told by people, you can see this picture on the right-hand side as a homemade slow feeder. It looks like it's got metal mesh in it. In the cold, then that can really, I think, gets their lips stuck on it. But also metal mesh will wear away at their teeth. So you want to use more of a elastic bungee if you're making a slow feeder. So how much hay will your horse need throughout the wintertime? If we're going with that conservative 1.5% of body weight, then that's 15 pounds a day for that 1,000-pound horse. over about 5 months of winter, and I know it's not really 5 months of winter. We've got a few months of mud season for the fall, and then mud season in the spring, and then we've got the cold in the middle. It works out to be about, sorry, it's covered up here, about a little over a ton of hay per day, not per day, per 5 months, with an average local grass bale being about 40 pounds. So that's about 60 pounds of hay, 60 bales of hay that you're having to store for that 5 months. And there are not many people I know that only have one horse. So you can see how the hay racks up. Let's look at what you can do if you don't just have, you don't have over a ton of hay for your horses. You don't have that much storage area. You can see this diet here is balanced. If we feed our 2 ounces of DAC orange, our grass hay to this horse that isn't doing anything, but you can use any kind of alfalfa, pellet, timothy pellet, beet pulp shred, soy hulls. These are all really low in carbohydrates. But they're much easier to store if they're in a bag. They're consistent. It's easier to carry your DAC orange on something like this because you can use that as the feed, put a couple of squirts of oil in there to make it all stick together. So you can see there are other alternatives if you, well, number one, don't have the best quality hay, or if you just don't have the storage area. So if we have a poorer quality local grass hay that's running about 0.7 to 0.8 megacals per pound, then absolutely adding in some alfalfa pellets or some timothy pellets to boost the calorie content will be the first step in increasing the calories in your horse's diet to help keep them warm. Let's look at water intake, because water intake is really, really important for a horse's all through the year, but I think people forget about it in the wintertime. So estimated water needs of that horse that's 1,000 pounds, if you put it here in the terms of milk jugs, you can see it's between 5 and 15 milk jugs a day, or gallons a day. So a horse at maintenance between 5 and 15 gallons per day. Really, it depends on the horse, and it depends on that lower critical temperature. Are they doing anything? Yearling horse between 4 and 5 gallons a day. If you're exercising your horses, between 15 and 20. And don't use the guide of, well, he didn't sweat, so he didn't lose a lot of extra moisture, so he doesn't need a lot of water. In the wintertime, the air temperature is very dry, so your horse may be sweating, but it's evaporating so quickly that you're not seeing it. Pregnancy, between 5 and 15 gallons of water, and lactating horses between 30 and 20 gallons, because that milk is primarily water. So it's really important that you're making sure these horses drink plenty of water. What can you do to make sure that your horses are drinking water? Well, it's kind of hard if you have automatic waterers. So if you're concerned your horse may not be drinking enough water, the urine in the stall is smelling really strong, it's really cloudy, they're a little tucked up, then you can try adding a palatability agent to the water, maybe adding a little apple juice or a little Gatorade. Don't think that the Gatorade is replacing the electrolytes, because it's balanced for humans, but it's just flavoring the water, so that they might be inclined to drink it more if they don't like the taste of your water. Adding about a tablespoon of salt to your feed every day can also increase water intake. So some tests that you can do to see if your horse is dehydrated. And again, we think about this a lot in the wintertime, but we don't in the summertime, but we don't think about it a lot in the winter. But we really should, because it's very easy for horses to get dehydrated, and it's easy for them to get dehydrated in the wintertime because we're just not thinking about monitoring their water intake as much, so we're just not taking as much notice. So the test for dehydration, the capillary refill time, you curl up the upper lip and press your thumb against their gum, and if the color in the gum return, so you'll know when you stick your thumb on their gum and you press, all the blood will go away from that area and it'll go whiter, go lighter in color. Within 2 seconds, if the color returns, then the horse is hydrated. If it takes any longer than 3 seconds or more, then that's a sign that the horse may be a little dehydrated. Then also the skin pinch test, and we usually do it right above the shoulder on the neck. And if you pull the skin up, it should snap back quickly. And if it takes less than a second, if it just goes straight back down, then usually that horse is hydrated. If it takes 2 to 4 seconds or above 4 seconds, then the horse is dehydrated. And you need to make sure that you get them to drink some water. The other thing is making sure that you're feeding your horses enough fiber. We've talked about that before, just as far as keeping them warm and decreasing our digestive upset, but the fiber in the gut also acts as a bit of a reservoir, so it will keep them hydrated. And by adding, say, half a pound of hay, you can get them to drink significant amounts of water. There's research to show that by increasing the fiber content in the diet, that they will actually increase their water intake. So it goes hand in hand for a number of reasons. Now, thin horses, you're going to be fighting a bit of an uphill battle at this point with the cold temperatures to get weight on a horse. But to go from, say, a 4 to a 5, we're going to be adding about 40 to 45 pounds to change that horse's body condition score. We can do that in about 60 days, so 2 months. At this point, I would be, adding additional calories, but I would not expect that it would be this quick if we're fighting the cold and we're fighting trying to get weight on them. So typically with normal temperatures, excuse me, if you're going to choose oats as your calorie source, so over and above what you're currently feeding them, that 1.5% of body weight in hay, and let's say you're feeding 5 pounds of a pelleted forage. If you would choose oats for your calorie source, about 4.5 pounds of oats a day for that 60 days, but let's just say it's probably going to be more like 3 months. Or at least can we maintain them and not have them lose any more weight until we get to the warmer temperatures where we can use the additional calories we're feeding them for weight gain. Rice bran, about 4.5 pounds of rice bran. Beet pulp, this is dry, non-molasses beet pulp, just about 5 pounds. You're going to wet it. That's going to turn into about 10 to 15 pounds. Alfalfa hay, about 6 pounds. But my go-to for pure weight gain is a little over 2 cups of vegetable oil, or the DAC oil, per day. Now, the one thing I'll say about the oil is the bacteria in the hindgut, they won't create any heat when you're feeding them oil. So a combination of fiber, good quality fiber, and the oil will give you both benefits. It'll give you heat production, plus it will also give you weight gain. Excuse me. All right. Now, if we have that fat horse, though, it sounds terrible, but the best thing to do for a fat horse, the winter can be your friend. Don't put a cover on him. Then you don't have to feel like you're going to starve him and feed him less. You can still feed him plenty of hay so we don't get digestive upset. He keeps himself warm. But don't blanket fat horses. That is an easy way to help them shed a little bit of weight. So here, an 8 or a 9, don't blanket these horses. You can see this guy's got a pretty hairy coat anyway, so he is going to stay pretty warm in the wintertime, but so that we don't have to really deprive them of the fiber that they need for gut health, just don't put a blanket on them. Which now leads me into talking more about the Breeders' Excel. And it leads me to obesity and its negative effects on semen quality. And I want to talk about this first because it doesn't matter how good, and you've heard me say this over and over again, it doesn't matter how good a supplement is or a feed ingredient is. we know that managing horses is a big puzzle, and the nutrition or a supplement is one small part of it, and we need to make sure that the overall picture is all of the pieces are in place. So the first thing you want to make sure that you do with stallions is don't have them overweight. Now, I will have a stallion, a breeding stallion, with a little extra cushion going into the breeding season, especially if I know he loses a lot of weight throughout the breeding season, but I'm certainly not going to have him fat. This is taken from human nutrition, obviously, so horses are not eating milkshakes and French fries and ice creams and whatever that other thing there is, but excess calories will increase obesity, which increases oxidation. We've talked about oxidation in the body, and it increases these reactive oxygen species. It's the primary reason why we feed large quantities of vitamin E to horses, because that's an antioxidant. We've heard about antioxidants, but not many people kind of put the two and two together. Well, what is an antioxidant doing? It's getting rid of these reactive oxygen species, these that create these oxidative environments that increase inflammation and decrease spermatogenesis. They decrease testosterone. So when we get this expansion of the fat cells or adipocytes, we get an increase in estrogen in a stallion. That's not good for a stallion. We get a decrease in testosterone. Again, not good for a stallion. So then we're going to have a decrease in spermatogenesis. So that's, again, not good for a breeding stallion. If we have a lot of this oxidative stress or reactive oxygen species floating around as a result of this obesity, then it's also going to damage the sperm. So that's just what I want to say there, because you need to make sure that you have your stallion in ideal body condition before we start feeding him anything. Then it goes to what in a supplement is going to be ideal for breeding stallions. So we want to look for a supplement with omega-3s. So we've discussed that there is actually 3 different types of omega-3s. This alpha-linoleic acid comes from dark green vegetables or forage. It comes from flax and chia and hemp and camelina. There are lots of plant sources that this ALA comes from. But that does not directly have an effect in the horse's body. That has to get converted through these intermediary molecules to DHA and EPA. And it's the DHA and EPA that give us the sperm benefits, that give us the muscle benefits, that give us the anti-inflammatory benefits, brain, eye development, respiratory health. All the benefits that we know come from omega-3s actually come from the omega-3 called DHA. And we know that the conversion in the horse from ALA to DHA and EPA is less than 1%. So I don't want to rely on these flax, chia, hemp, these plant forms of omega-3s. So we bypass that and we go to DHA, which comes from our marine sources. Certain types of algae will create DHA, and therefore fish that eat that algae are high in DHA. You can see here, ALA really is just a source of energy. EPA helps with cardiovascular function and reduces inflammation, but the DHA, brain development, vision development, cardiovascular, it helps with so many different aspects. You say, well, is there research in horses? And there is a lot of research in horses in all of these different areas. Exercise, heart rate, exercise recovery, breathing issues, pulmonary disorders, and improving. There's a lot of research on semen quality, improving cooled semen motility characteristics, decreasing inflammation when we're feeding DHA directly. So those of you that have been around a while know that back in about 2011, we came out with a product called Breeders Excel. And the Breeders Excel at that point was, as you see it on the screen, it was this was the guaranteed analysis. had 18% crude protein, crude fat, fiber listed on the guaranteed analysis. It had 1,000 IUs of vitamin E, and it had 941 milligrams of DHA per ounce. But the feeding rate for mares was 8 ounces a day. For stallions, it was a pound a day. And so that was a lot to feed. So we decided around, I think, 2016, when we brought out the DHA Perform, that we would transition the Breeders' Excel formula to straight DHA. So it was just DHA, and it would give you about 30,000 milligrams of DHA per serving size, and the serving size was 4 to 6 ounces for stallions, so you're feeding significantly less. But consumers have told us that it was difficult to get several horses to eat the straight DHA. And we all know that there was a price increase because DHA has become a lot more popular. If you look at any of your milk or eggs in the supermarkets, you'll know that DHA is really included in a lot of those ingredients. So the human consumption of DHA has gone through the roof because it is so beneficial to the body. And the source of DHA that we use is human-grade DHA. So with all that being said, we've taken on those consumer requests, and we've actually gone back to the previous formulation of Breeders' Excel. It's more cost effective because there's slightly less DHA. We've got the vitamin E in there, and it's much more palatable. So this is what, if you buy Breeders' Excel now, if you're buying it if your clients are buying it or you're selling it, this is the formulation. Slightly less DHA, but still absolutely enough to be helping with semen quality. This has also got vitamin E in it, which this time of year, we know that horses don't get a lot of vitamin E because we get fresh vitamin E from fresh green grass. Horses aren't eating that. So we know that vitamin E is really important. And I mentioned on that obesity slide that vitamin E is a powerful antioxidant. So this combination of vitamin E and DHA is really ideal. So again, we're now going to feed about 8 ounces to mares because there is research that this DHA vitamin E combination can help with oocyte quality. So if you have a mare that may be a little difficult to get pregnant or maintain pregnancy, then you certainly could try feeding her the Breeders' Excel along with a vitamin mineral supplement like the Breeders' Choice. Stallions, you're back to feeding 16 ounces a day, so it's a pound a day. We need to do that so that we can put enough carriers and palatability agents in there to make it palatable to the horses. As always, it should be introduced about 60 days prior to the first intended breeding cycle because that is the length of seminal turnover. So we really want to make sure that when we start feeding it, we're giving the horse enough time to have an effect in the body. So in a pound, what you're actually going to get out of this product, because the label will give you what you'll get per ounce, but in a pound, which is what you're feeding stallions, you're getting 1,000 IUs of vitamin E. And if you're feeding the DAC oil as well, which has 4,000 IUs per pound, so let's just say you're feeding a half a pound, a cup of oil as well, because you're trying to get some weight on the stallion, you're giving them significant amounts of vitamin E, which is really ideal. And then the DHA, you're going to get about 15,000 milligrams. So down from about 27,000 milligrams in the straight DHA formula when you were feeding the 6 ounces a day. But as I mentioned, that was unpalatable, and the 15,000 milligrams is right where the research says we have benefits for semen quality. So absolutely give this a try with stallions, but get them on it now, especially those stallions that are going to start breeding, in the next couple of months. So questions, please. Type the questions in, unmute yourself and ask the question.
Good morning, Tanya.
Hi, Susie. How are you? Question.
I'm doing great. Out here, we've been having some ups and downs with our weather. Either it seems to be in the 70s or it's down in the 30s and 40s. And I'm just trying to balance out my clients' use of electrolytes in addition to the orange. We didn't touch on that as far as the water. You mentioned electrolytes, add salt or Gatorade. With our electroaid, how much can they actually have or need in addition to the Orange Superior or other general vitamins from DAC?
If I'm just trying to increase water intake, I'm more inclined to just add salt to the feed versus adding the electrolyte. But if these horses are exercising, then the maintenance in the cooler months, the maintenance dose of electrolyte is ideal. As we get into the hotter months where we are actively seeing them sweat a lot, then definitely needing to be bumping up the amount of electrolytes. I don't like to put the electrolytes in the water because I want to make sure that they're getting the full amount. If your horse doesn't like the taste of the electrolytes, really if your horse doesn't like the taste of anything, then you can put it in a 60cc syringe with some applesauce and squirt it in their mouth. That is, you can make a paste out of anything. But I'm less inclined to drive water intake with the electrolyte and more use salt and use the electrolyte when they're exercising. We've got another question here. My vet is always trying to say that oil is too rich and can make a horse colic. I, of course, have not had this problem. What do I tell her to go against this theory? In humans, high-fat diets, as we know, are really terrible. But horses never really... We have in research settings been able to feed horses 25% of their diet as fat as oil and have no negative effects. Your 2 cups of vegetable oil a day, which is about as much as any of you would ever feed for significant weight gain, is minimal in overall fat content. Now, the kind of theory behind this is, in the wild, grass is 2 to 3% fat. Horses do not have a gallbladder that stores bile that breaks down fat like we have a gallbladder because humans have a much higher fat diet. That being said, there is research paper after research paper after research paper from research groups all around the world and within America from pretty much every university that does equine research showing the benefits to feeding oil to horses and to decrease risk of colic. Absolutely. If you can decrease the amount of cereal grains you're feeding and increase the amount of oil that you're adding so that you're giving them calories from fat and fiber instead of cereal grains, that absolutely decreases the risk of colic. And one of the best veterinarians in the world, who is my PhD advisor, did a lot of that research. So we don't want to feed a lot of corn oil to horses. It is very palatable, but it's high in omega-6 fatty acids, which are pro-inflammatory. That being said, it's not going to cause colic. So I hope that answers your question. Well, I thank everybody for attending today, and I hope to see you next month. I think that the webinar is February 7th, Feb 7th. It's Thursday, February 7th, and because this one was at 10:30 in the morning, it will be in the evening.